It was a crisp autumn morning in San Francisco when Sundar Pichai arrived at the Grand Conference Center. The annual Tech Forward Summit was set to begin in 3 hours, and Pichai, the CEO of Google, wanted to check the venue before his keynote speech. He had always been meticulous about presentations, a habit from his early days as a product manager. Pichai parked his Tesla in the nearly empty parking lot. He wore a simple gray t-shirt, blue jeans, and white sneakers, his typical casual style when not in business meetings. His security team would arrive later with other Google executives. For now, he enjoyed the rare moment of anonymity and quiet. The massive conference hall was bustling with staff setting up chairs, testing sound equipment, and arranging promotional materials. Pichai nodded politely to workers who didn't recognize him as he made his way to the main stage. He wanted to familiarize himself with the layout and check the presentation system. On stage, Pichai noticed the presentation clicker wasn't working properly. Years of engineering experience kicked in, and he knelt down to examine the AV connection box at the edge of the stage. He removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and began troubleshooting the issue. "Hey, you there! We need this area cleaned up right away," a sharp voice called out. Pichai looked up to see a woman in her 40s with a clipboard and an official event badge. This was Melissa Jenkins, the head coordinator for the conference, who had been working non-stop for weeks to ensure everything ran perfectly. "The VIPs will be arriving soon, and this stage needs to be spotless," Jenkins continued, walking briskly toward him. "And please make sure the trash bins are emptied before attendees arrive." Pichai stood up slowly, a confused smile forming on his face. He began, but Jenkins cut him off. "Look, I know everyone's busy, but this is the main stage. The Google CEO is speaking here in a few hours," she said, looking down at her checklist. "We can't have maintenance staff still working when guests arrive." She handed him a list of cleaning tasks without making eye contact. "Once you finish here, the bathrooms near the VIP lounge need attention. Some of the sinks are running slowly." Pichai looked at the paper in his hand, momentarily speechless. He wasn't angry or offended, more amused and curious about how to handle the situation. A young tech assistant named Kevin rushed onto the stage, his eyes widening when he saw Pichai. Kevin had attended a Google developer conference the previous year and immediately recognized the CEO. "Ms. Jenkins," Kevin called out, his voice cracking with panic. "That's Sundar Pichai." "Who?" Jenkins asked, still focused on her clipboard. "Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, the keynote speaker," Kevin stammered, his face turning bright red. Jenkins froze. She looked up slowly, finally making eye contact with Pichai. The color drained from her face as recognition dawned. The clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered on the stage floor. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "Mr. Pichai, I didn't. I never meant to." Nearby staff members stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold. A heavy silence fell over the stage area as everyone realized what had happened. Pichai's response in that moment would surprise everyone and set in motion a chain of events that no one at the conference could have anticipated. Jenkins stood frozen on the stage, her face a picture of horror. The clipboard she had been clutching so confidently moments ago now lay at her feet. Around them, staff members had stopped working, their eyes wide as they witnessed the uncomfortable scene. "Mr. Pichai, I am so incredibly sorry," Jenkins finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. She bent down quickly to retrieve her clipboard, nearly losing her balance in the process. "I had no idea it was you. There's no excuse for my behavior." Pichai looked at the cleaning task list still in his hand, then back at Jenkins. A small smile formed at the corners of his mouth. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his reaction. Would the powerful tech CEO become angry? Would there be consequences for this embarrassing mistake? "It's really not a problem," Pichai said, his voice calm and gentle. "Actually, I was just trying to fix the presentation clicker. It seems to be malfunctioning." Kevin, the young tech assistant who had recognized Pichai, rushed forward. "I can help with that, sir," he offered eagerly, perhaps trying to make up for his colleague's mistake. Jenkins remained mortified. "Mr. Pichai, I don't know what to say. I've been organizing this event for months, and I've been looking forward to your keynote speech. I never imagined our first meeting would be like this." By now, Word of the incident was spreading through the conference center. Staff members whispered to each other, and a few people had taken out their phones, though they tried to be discreet about it. Pichai noticed this and decided to take control of the situation. "Ms. Jenkins, is it?" he asked. "Yes, Melissa Jenkins," she replied, still looking like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her. "Ms. Jenkins, I grew up in a middle-class family in India. My father was a factory manager, and he taught me that there is dignity in all work. Being mistaken for maintenance staff isn't an insult to me." He handed the cleaning list back to her with a warm smile. "Though I must admit, fixing bathroom sinks is beyond my technical expertise." A few nervous laughs came from the gathering crowd. Jenkins didn't know how to respond. This was not the reaction she had expected from one of the most powerful business leaders in the world. "Actually," Pichai continued, looking at his watch, "since I'm here early, would you mind giving me a tour of the venue? I'd like to understand the full layout before my speech." The request caught Jenkins off guard, but she quickly composed herself. "Of course, Mr. Pichai, I would be honored." As they walked away from the stage, Pichai noticed the young tech assistant still standing there, looking unsure. "Kevin, right?" Pichai called back. The young man nodded enthusiastically. "Would you mind taking a look at that clicker? I think it needs a new battery." "Right away, sir," Kevin replied, beaming with pride at being remembered and given a task by the Google CEO. As Pichai and Jenkins walked through the conference center, staff members watched in amazement. Instead of anger or arrogance, the tech leader displayed kindness and humility. Jenkins began to relax slightly as she showed Pichai the various areas of the venue. "We've set up a special green room for you and the other speakers," she explained, leading him down a hallway. "And where do the maintenance and service staff take their breaks?" Pichai asked unexpectedly. Jenkins blinked, caught off guard by the question. They have a small room near the back kitchen area." Pichai nodded thoughtfully. "I'd like to see that too, if possible." As they continued their tour, Jenkins began to see a different side of the tech executive, one that few people got to witness. Little did she know that this awkward case of mistaken identity was about to transform into something much bigger than either of them could imagine. As the tour continued, Jenkins led Pichai to the staff break room. It was a small space with worn furniture, a single microwave, and a coffee machine that had seen better days. 3 maintenance workers sat at a round table, eating an early lunch. When the door opened, they looked up with surprise at the unlikely pair entering their space. "Hello," Pichai said with a warm smile, extending his hand to each worker. "I'm Sundar." The workers exchanged confused glances before introducing themselves. They clearly had no idea who he was. "Do you mind if I join you for a moment?" Pichai asked, pulling out a chair without waiting for an answer. Jenkins stood awkwardly by the door, still processing the strange turn this morning had taken. She watched as the CEO of one of the world's most valuable companies sat down with the maintenance staff and began asking them questions about their work. "How long have you been working at this conference center?" Pichai asked a middle-aged man named Robert. "Almost 15 years now," Robert replied, slowly becoming more comfortable. "Started right after my military service ended." Pichai nodded with genuine interest. "What's the biggest challenge in keeping a place like this running smoothly?" As Robert described the behind-the-scenes efforts required for major events, the other workers began to join the conversation. They shared stories about famous speakers they had encountered and disasters they had prevented at the last minute. "Last year, we had a major plumbing issue just 2 hours before a big tech conference," said Maria, the oldest of the group. "Nobody in the audience ever knew because we fixed it just in time." "That's exactly my point," Pichai said, leaning forward. "The best technology should be like good maintenance work, invisible when it's done right, but its absence would be immediately noticed." The break room door opened again as Kevin, the tech assistant, poked his head in. "Mr. Pichai, the stage manager was wondering if you'd like to do a sound check before the crowds arrive." The maintenance workers' expressions changed instantly as they realized who had been sitting with them. Robert nearly choked on his sandwich. "Wait, you're Sundar Pichai?" Maria asked, her eyes wide with disbelief. Pichai smiled and nodded. "I should get back to preparation, but thank you for the conversation. Your work makes all of this possible." He stood and shook their hands again before following Kevin out. As they walked back toward the main hall, Jenkins finally found her voice. That was unexpected, Mr. Pichai. Most executives don't take interest in the maintenance staff. Most executives forget that complex systems rely on every component working properly, Pichai replied. Google's data centers wouldn't function without proper maintenance. Neither would this conference. They arrived at the stage, now bustling with activity as the technical crew made final preparations. The presentation clicker had been fixed, and the large screens displayed the Google logo. Ms. Jenkins, Pichai said, turning to face her directly. I have a request for my introduction. Of course, anything, she replied quickly. I'd like you to be the one to introduce me. Jenkins stared at him in shock. But sir, after what happened, surely you'd prefer someone else? Actually, I think you're perfectly suited for it, Pichai said with a smile. Besides, I've made some changes to my speech, and I'd like to share them with you. As the conference hall began filling with attendees, Jenkins helped Pichai prepare in the green room. Top Google executives arrived, along with famous tech journalists and industry leaders. Everyone wanted a moment of the CEO's time, but he remained focused on the conversation with Jenkins. When she finally left to prepare for the introduction, Jenkins felt a strange mixture of emotions. The morning's humiliation had somehow transformed into something else entirely. She didn't yet understand Pichai's intentions, but she sensed that something significant was about to happen. Outside, the conference hall was now packed with 3,000 attendees, all eagerly waiting for the Google CEO to take the stage. None of them knew about the morning's incident, but they were about to witness its surprising aftermath. The main hall of the Grand Conference Center was packed to capacity. 3,000 attendees sat in hushed anticipation, their faces illuminated by the glow of smartphones and tablets. On the massive screens flanking the stage, a countdown timer ticked away the final seconds before the keynote address. Jenkins stood backstage, nervously adjusting her blazer and reviewing the introduction notes Pichai had given her. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the paper. Despite Pichai's kindness, she still couldn't believe she was about to introduce the Google CEO after mistaking him for a janitor just hours earlier. 30 seconds, Ms. Jenkins, a stage manager whispered, giving her a reassuring nod. The lights dimmed, and a dramatic instrumental piece began playing through the speakers. The crowd fell silent as Jenkins took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The spotlight followed her to the podium. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice steadier than she expected. My name is Melissa Jenkins, and I'm the event coordinator for this year's Tech Forward Summit. It's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker. She paused, looking down at her notes before continuing with unexpected candor. But before I do, I want to share something that happened this morning. When I arrived at this venue at 6 a.m., I was focused on checklists and schedules. I was stressed about making sure everything was perfect for all of you, and especially for our distinguished speakers. The audience listened with curiosity, wondering where this unusual introduction was heading. A few hours ago, I saw someone kneeling on this very stage, working with the equipment. Without looking closely, I assumed this person was a maintenance worker who needed to hurry up and finish before the VIPs arrived. Jenkins' voice cracked slightly. That person was Sundar Pichai. A collective gasp rose from the audience, followed by nervous laughter and whispers. What happened next taught me an important lesson about leadership and character. Mr. Pichai didn't get angry. He didn't correct me immediately. And when I realized my mistake and was utterly mortified, he showed me nothing but kindness and respect. The crowd grew completely silent, hanging on her every word. So it's my great honor to introduce someone who leads not just with brilliant business strategy, but with genuine humility and grace, the Chief Executive Officer of Google, Mr. Sundar Pichai. The audience erupted in applause as Pichai walked onto the stage. He hugged Jenkins briefly before taking his position at the center of the stage. The applause continued for nearly a minute before he raised his hands to quiet the crowd. Thank you, Melissa, for that incredibly honest introduction, Pichai began with a warm smile, and thank you all for being here today. He walked to the edge of the stage, closer to the audience, eschewing the podium entirely. I had prepared a speech about Google's latest innovations and our vision for the future of technology. And don't worry, I'll get to that, he said with a light chuckle. But first, I want to expand on what Melissa shared with you. Pichai described the morning's events from his perspective. careful to emphasize Jenkins' dedication to her job rather than her mistake. The audience listened intently, many taking out their phones to record this unexpected beginning. What struck me most about this morning wasn't the misunderstanding itself, but what it revealed. Pichai continued. In the tech industry, we often celebrate certain roles while making others invisible. We praise founders and executives, but rarely acknowledge the essential workers who make our work possible. He gestured toward the back of the hall. The maintenance staff who prepared this venue, the security team keeping us safe, the food service workers who will serve lunch later, they are as vital to this ecosystem as any CEO or engineer. Pichai then shared a personal story that few had heard before. He described his middle-class upbringing in India, sleeping in the living room of his family's small apartment, and watching his parents work tirelessly to provide opportunities for their children. My father worked as a manufacturing plant manager. He taught me that dignity exists in all forms of honest work, and that true leadership means recognizing the value in every contribution, no matter how visible or invisible it might seem. As Pichai's speech continued, something remarkable was happening in the audience. People were not just listening, they were being transformed. By the time Pichai finished his keynote speech, the atmosphere in the Grand Conference Center had transformed. What started as a typical tech industry event had become something much more meaningful. As attendees filed out of the main hall for the lunch break, the conversations were noticeably different from the usual network and impress chatter of such gatherings. "Did you record his speech?" a young startup founder asked her colleague. "I want to share it with my entire team when we get back." "I'd never heard a tech CEO talk like that before," another attendee remarked. "So honest and human." What none of them knew was that someone in the audience had already shared a brief clip of Jenkins' introduction and the beginning of Pichai's speech on social media. The post was simple. "Google CEO Sundar Pichai mistaken for a janitor this morning. His response will restore your faith in leadership." Within an hour, the clip had been viewed 50,000 times. By the end of the lunch break, it had reached 500,000. The hashtag dignity in work began trending nationwide. Meanwhile, Pichai was having a quiet lunch in a small private room with Jenkins and, surprisingly, the maintenance staff he had met earlier. Robert, Maria, and the others sat somewhat uncomfortably at first, unused to dining with a tech billionaire. "I hope you don't mind that I mentioned our conversation in my speech," Pichai said to them. "Your perspectives were valuable to me." "We're just shocked you remembered our names," Maria replied with a laugh. "And that you wanted to have lunch with us instead of all those important people out there." Jenkins watched this interaction with amazement. Throughout her 15-year career organizing high-profile events, she had never seen an executive of Pichai's stature show such genuine interest in service staff. "Mr. Pichai," she said hesitantly, "your phone has been buzzing nonstop. Don't you need to check it?" Pichai glanced at his phone and smiled. "It appears our morning encounter has gone viral," he said, showing them the screen. The video clip had now been viewed over 1 million times, and the numbers were climbing rapidly. Robert nearly choked on his sandwich. "You mean people are watching a video about us? About this?" "About all of us," Pichai corrected him. "About seeing value in each other beyond job titles and positions." As lunch ended, Pichai excused himself to prepare for afternoon meetings. Jenkins escorted him back toward the executive area, still processing everything that had happened. "Ms. Jenkins," Pichai said as they walked, "I'd like to invite you and the maintenance team to visit Google headquarters next month. Would that be possible?" Jenkins stopped walking, stunned by the invitation. "Of course, Mr. Pichai. They would be honored. We all would." "Excellent. My assistant will contact you to arrange it. And please call me Sundar." Back in the main conference area, the afternoon sessions were beginning, but something had changed. Several tech executives who had witnessed Pichai's speech had modified their own presentations on the fly, incorporating messages about workplace dignity and recognition. In the press room, journalists were furiously writing articles with headlines like "The Janitor CEO," "How Sundar Pichai's humility is changing tech culture," and "Mistaken identity leads to viral moment at tech conference." Social media continued to explode with reactions. Former Google employees shared stories about Pichai's leadership style that aligned with what people had witnessed today. Workers from various industries used the trending hashtag to share their own experiences of being overlooked or undervalued. One tweet from a prominent tech investor gained particular attention. Just watched Pichai turn an embarrassing moment into a masterclass on leadership. This isn't PR. This is who he really is. I've seen it firsthand. By the end of the conference day, what had started as an awkward case of mistaken identity had evolved into a cultural moment that was spreading far beyond the tech industry. And for Jenkins, who had begun the day fearing she might lose her job over her mistake, something unexpected was happening. Job offers were beginning to fill her inbox from companies who valued her honesty and integrity in handling the situation. This story was just beginning to unfold, and no one, not even Pichai himself, could have predicted what would happen next. 1 month after the Tech Forward Summit, Melissa Jenkins stood nervously at the entrance to Google's Mountain View headquarters. Beside her were Robert, Maria, and 3 other maintenance staff members from the conference center. They had all been given the day off and transported here in a luxury van arranged by Google. "I still can't believe this is happening," Robert whispered, looking up at the famous Google logo on the building. "My kids didn't believe me when I told them where I was going today." Jenkins smiled, though she too felt out of place. Despite organizing events for tech giants for years, she had never been invited inside as a special guest. After the conference incident went viral, her life had changed dramatically. She had received job offers from several major companies, including 3 tech firms who wanted her to lead their corporate culture initiatives. "Welcome to Google." A cheerful young woman approached the group. "I'm Priya, Mr. Pichai's executive assistant. He's looking forward to seeing you all again." They followed Priya through security and into the colorful, bustling campus. Employees zipped by on scooters or walked in small groups, engaged in animated conversations. Some glanced curiously at Jenkins and her group, clearly wondering who these visitors might be. "Is that them?" a voice called out, and they turned to see Sundar Pichai walking toward them with a warm smile. He was dressed much like he had been at the conference, simple jeans and a button-up shirt, though today there would be no mistaking him for maintenance staff. "Thank you all for coming," Pichai said, shaking each person's hand. "I've been looking forward to this visit." For the next hour, Pichai personally led them on a tour of the Google campus. He showed them the famous cafeterias, the game rooms, and the innovative workspaces. Employees stopped to greet him with obvious respect, but what surprised Jenkins was how many of them Pichai knew by name, not just executives, but engineers, cafeteria workers, and security staff. "That's Miguel. He makes the best coffee in Mountain View," Pichai told them, pointing to a barista who beamed at the recognition. "And that's Diane. She's been driving our shuttle buses for 12 years and knows every shortcut in the Bay Area." After the tour, Pichai brought them to a conference room where lunch was waiting. To their surprise, 5 other people were already seated at the table: Google's chief people officer, 2 board members, and 2 employees wearing maintenance uniforms. "I hope you don't mind, but I've invited a few others to join us," Pichai explained. "After our conversation at the conference, I've been thinking a lot about workplace dignity and recognition." Over lunch, Pichai explained that the viral video of his speech had sparked important conversations within Google. The company was now launching a new initiative called Full Spectrum Recognition, designed to celebrate contributions from employees at all levels. "And that's why I invited you here today," Pichai said, looking at Jenkins and the maintenance staff. "We'd like your input on this initiative. You inspired it, after all." For the next 2 hours, the group engaged in a surprisingly open discussion about workplace culture. Robert described how in 15 years at the conference center, he had never been invited to an event after party, despite being responsible for the venue's operations. Maria shared stories of being treated as invisible by the same executives who would panic if the air conditioning failed during their presentations. The Google executives listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. The maintenance staff, initially hesitant to speak up, gradually became more comfortable sharing their perspectives. "What you're describing," said the chief people officer, "is exactly what we want to address. Not just at Google, but hopefully by setting an example for the entire industry." As the meeting concluded, Pichai had one more surprise. "We've created a short video about this initiative that will be shared company-wide tomorrow," he said. "With your permission, we'd like to include your stories as the catalyst for this change." Jenkins looked at her colleagues, who nodded in agreement. What had begun as the most embarrassing moment of her career had somehow transformed into something much more meaningful. "There's one more person I'd like you to meet," Pichai said as they walked out of the conference room. "Someone who read about your story and wanted to discuss it further." As they turned the corner, Jenkins gasped. Standing in the hallway, waiting to meet them, was one of the most famous tech leaders in the world. Someone whose identity would soon take this story in yet another unexpected direction. Standing in the hallway was Tim Cook, CEO of Apple. His presence at Google headquarters was so unexpected that Jenkins had to blink twice to make sure she wasn't imagining things. "Tim wanted to join our conversation," Pichai explained casually, as if rival tech CEOs visited each other's campuses every day. "He reached out after seeing the video from the conference." Cook stepped forward with a warm smile, shaking hands with Jenkins and the maintenance staff. "Your story resonated with me," he said. "I started my career in production and operations at IBM. I've never forgotten what it's like to be the person behind the scenes making things work." The group moved to a larger conference room where several more people were waiting. Executives from Microsoft, Adobe, and 3 other major tech companies. On the wall, a screen displayed a video call with leaders from Facebook, Amazon, and Tesla. Jenkins felt like she had stepped into some alternate reality. A month ago, she was just an event coordinator having the worst morning of her career. Now she was sitting at a table with the leaders of the world's most powerful tech companies. "We've been talking about this for weeks," Cook explained, taking a seat at the table. "What happened at the conference touched on something important that's been missing from our industry conversations." Pichai nodded. "Tech has a visibility problem. We celebrate founders, engineers, and designers, but we've created a culture where many essential workers feel invisible." For the next hour, the tech leaders discussed a joint initiative they were calling Visible Value. It would start with a commitment from each company to implement recognition programs for staff at all levels, focusing particularly on roles that traditionally received less attention: maintenance, food service, security, transportation, and facilities management. "But this isn't just about recognition," said the Microsoft CEO. "It's about respect, fair compensation, and career advancement opportunities." Throughout the discussion, the tech leaders repeatedly turned to Jenkins and the maintenance staff for input. Robert, who had been quiet for most of the visit, finally spoke up. "With all due respect," he said, his voice slightly hesitant, "fancy programs and videos are nice, but what workers like us really want is to be treated with basic dignity every day. Not just when a CEO accidentally gets mistaken for one of us and it goes viral." A momentary silence fell over the room. Then Cook nodded. "That's exactly right," he said. "This can't be a PR exercise. It has to be authentic and sustainable." The meeting concluded with concrete plans. Each company would review its compensation structures for support staff, create advancement pathways for all positions, and implement what they were calling reverse shadowing, where executives would spend days working alongside maintenance and support teams. As Jenkins and her group prepared to leave, Pichai had one more announcement. "We'd like to offer each of you a role in this initiative," he said. "Not as employees of Google specifically, but as consultants to the entire program across all participating companies." The maintenance workers looked at each other in disbelief. "You mean, leave our jobs at the conference center?" Maria asked. "Only if you want to," Pichai clarified. "This would be a 1-year position with competitive compensation. You would help ensure that these programs actually address the real issues faced by workers in your positions." For Jenkins, a separate offer was extended. Several of the companies wanted her to lead the public-facing aspects of the initiative, sharing the story that had started it all and helping other organizations implement similar programs. As they left Google headquarters that evening, riding back in the luxury van, no one spoke for several minutes. They were all processing the extraordinary turn their lives had taken. "Do you think anything will really change?" Robert finally asked, looking out the window at the passing Silicon Valley landscape. "I think it already has," Jenkins replied. "Not just for us, but maybe for thousands of others too." That night, as news of the multi-company initiative broke online, the story of Sundar Pichai being mistaken for a janitor went viral again, but this time with a new chapter that no one could have predicted. What began as a moment of humiliation had sparked a movement that was beginning to spread far beyond the tech industry. touching on questions of dignity, visibility, and value that resonated with workers everywhere. And for Jenkins, who had been certain that her career was over that morning at the conference, an entirely new path was just beginning. The grand ballroom of the Beverly Hilton was filled to capacity. Celebrities, tech executives, political figures, and media personalities sat side by side at elegantly decorated tables. On stage, beneath sparkling chandeliers, stood Melissa Jenkins, now almost unrecognizable from the flustered event coordinator of a year ago. The audience applauded warmly. Many of them knew Jenkins' story. It had become one of the most shared workplace narratives of the year. Exactly 1 year ago today, I made a mistake that changed my life, Jenkins continued. I mistook Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, for a maintenance worker. She paused as light laughter rippled through the crowd. What I didn't realize then was that my embarrassing moment would spark a movement that would change thousands of lives. The large screens behind her displayed photos from the past year, the original conference, the meeting at Google headquarters, and images from dozens of companies that had joined the Visible Value Initiative. In just 12 months, over 300 major corporations have implemented visible value programs, Jenkins explained. More than 1 million workers in traditionally overlooked positions have received improved benefits, clear advancement paths, and meaningful recognition. She invited Robert and Maria to join her on stage. Both had left their jobs at the conference center to become full-time advocates with the foundation. Robert now led the training program that taught executives how to recognize and value all workers in their organizations. Maria had developed a certification program for companies committed to workplace dignity. But tonight isn't about us, Robert said, taking the microphone. It's about celebrating the companies and leaders who have made real changes. The evening proceeded with awards in various categories. Tech companies that had implemented the most effective support staff advancement programs, manufacturing firms with innovative recognition initiatives, healthcare organizations that had improved conditions for cleaning and maintenance workers. Midway through the ceremony, a special video presentation began. It showed before and after stories of workers whose lives had been transformed by the initiative. A former janitor who had been given management training and now supervised a facilities team. A cafeteria worker who had been helped to complete her degree and moved into corporate nutrition planning. A shuttle driver whose suggestion for improving company transportation had been implemented company-wide, saving millions of dollars. This movement isn't charity, Maria emphasized after the video. It's about recognizing the full value that every worker brings to an organization. Near the end of the evening came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Jenkins returned to the podium with a special introduction. Our final award tonight goes to the person whose response to an awkward situation made all of this possible. His humility and grace turned what could have been just another viral moment into meaningful change for workers around the world. Please welcome to the stage the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai. The audience rose for a standing ovation as Pichai walked to the podium. He embraced Jenkins, Robert, and Maria before addressing the crowd. Thank you for this honor, but I don't deserve the credit, Pichai said humbly. Real change happens when many people choose to see each other differently. That's what's happened here. Pichai shared that Google's internal studies had shown unexpected benefits from their visible value program. Employee satisfaction had increased across all levels. Retention rates had improved. And most surprisingly, innovation had accelerated as ideas began flowing more freely between departments once previously invisible barriers had been removed. What began as a simple misunderstanding has become one of the most important leadership lessons of my career, Pichai concluded. In our rush to celebrate certain kinds of work, we've often failed to see the full humanity and potential of every person who contributes to our success. As the evening ended, Jenkins stood at the edge of the stage, watching as tech CEOs mingled with maintenance workers, all dressed in the same formal attire, all engaged in genuine conversation. The hierarchy that had once seemed so fixed had become more fluid, more human. A reporter approached her with one final question. Did you ever imagine that mistaking Sundar Pichai for a janitor would lead to all this? Jenkins smiled. Never. But that's the thing about dignity. Once you really see it in one person, you start to see it everywhere. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What had begun as a humiliating moment had transformed into a movement that was changing workplace culture around the world. And for Jenkins, Robert, Maria, and countless others, it was only the beginning.